Our next speaker is business legend Sir Martin Sorell. You'll be sitting on the edge of your seat as he shares insights that you won't hear anywhere else or from anyone else about the state of the advertising industry as it relates to privacy and technology. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Sir Martin to the stage.
So, welcome, Sir Martin. It's a pleasure to have you with us at Otherworld in probably one of the most anticipated interviews of this event.
I hope it's the most.
All right.
Okay, pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here. So far away, Bill.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start you with the hard one. So given the recent moves by companies like Apple and Google to minimize access that advertisers have over consumer data, how do you see advertising networks and brands alike evolve their marketing game? And what's the use of first-party data going to look like moving forward?
Well, it's not a hard question in a sense, because it's at the heart of what we're doing, either by luck or by judgment, at S4. And I think I'm a little bit surprised that there was surprise about Google's second blog, because their first blog came out, I think I'm right in saying, about January 2020, actually before the pandemic. And I remember being at a conference, at a Google conference, and talking to Google clients. And even then, there was, just after the first blog, they basically knew the direction in which things were going. I think the second blog, which was 6 weeks ago, whenever it was, sort of suddenly jolted people into action, because Google had said in January of 2020 it would take 2 years to phase out third-party cookies. Now, as to what impact this has, I've done a little survey, a random survey of mainly big global clients, mainly packaged goods clients, and the answers that they gave, were all pretty much the same. They were first-party data and access to the signals. So ironically, what Google has done, and indeed what Apple has done, really forces, in inverted commas, clients back to the platforms. And the answers that we got from the CMOs and CDOs, chief digital officers of the clients, was basically the system will be dominated by first-party data and about 20 walled gardens, if you like. And I think that really summarizes where things are going. If you look at Procter & Gamble, where Mark Pritchard, who's been, chief head of brands or head of marketing, CMO, whatever, for many, many years, and he's metamorphosized, if that's the right word, into the model that is a post-cookie model with first-party data. I think last time I looked, and it was some time ago, so it'll be bigger now, Procter had about 1.2 or 1.3 billion consumer profiles. In Procter's case, they've probably gone more for the trade desk than they have for Google, for I guess all sorts of reasons. But that's what they've done. And what they're building is a first-party data system or ecosystem, which they use to inform the development of content and its distribution through digital media on an always-on 24/7 basis. And I think that model, or the Netflix model. The Netflix model is, again, it's exactly the same. First-party data, the signals from the platforms. We do personalization at scale. We're extending our relationship with them. And we develop, in one series that we promoted for them, we had 1.6 million potential executions, creative executions, of which we use probably about 50 to 70,000 most frequently. But the era of personalized content with sort of central hubs distributing content to the regions. And the BMW Mini win from last year is a good example of that. You know, we're centralizing the production hub. We create, produce, and distribute digital content throughout, I think it's 27 sales companies. And the old argument used to be, you know, the heads of each of the sales companies, generally in the auto industry. I remember when we worked for Ford at WPP, that the head of Germany would say, the German consumer is different to the French or Italian or British consumer or Spanish consumer. So what we have to do is to do it ourselves here. That is not the case anymore in a digital world, and you can execute. So I think basically the system, you know, has gravitated. The other thing I would say is what I call the marketing VIX factor. You know, the VIX index measures volatility in the stock markets. The marketing VIX index, if there ever was one, has been intensified by Google and Apple's decision on IDFA. Neither of which, as I said before, should come as any surprise. IDFA, Google have said over 2 years, but Apple have been pushing it all the time. Hence the fracas with Facebook.
Yeah.
So we still have to see quite how Facebook goes. And Amazon, you know, fits exactly into that model. So our model, what we call the Holy Trinity model, which is first-party data driving the creation of digital advertising content, which is then distributed on digital media in a continuous loop. Yeah. Gone are the days where you could do 30-second TV ads to solve a problem because it just takes too long.
Sure.
So I think that's the net result. And the other thing is driven the demand. We've seen it in our numbers, and you'll see it in Q1 numbers, which we report, I think, on May the 7th. It's driven the demand for data and analytics consulting violently upward. You know, it's gone up rather like animation did when the pandemic hit, or robotic production, or moving from live events to online events. So I think that's what it's going to look like.
So a lot of interesting insights there. And, you know, it seems like what you're doing at S4 Capital, I can only assume, like looking backwards, that it might have been a calculated move, like building an agency that's digital only instead of including some traditional components of marketing to it.
You know, we're trying to sort of retrofit what we've done. The motivation of what I was doing, you know, when I left WPP, I was 73 years old. I'm now 76. And, you know, I think in the last, I've been doing, you know, I founded WPP and built it with you know, 200,000 other people, to build it to a leadership position. But in 2017, you know, the market sort of topped, if you like, for various reasons that we can go into. But and I felt on leaving WPP in April of 2018, so it's 3 years ago, that what I wanted to do was, in my last years that God gives me, is focus on growth.
Sure. That
I, you know, the stock markets, analysts and investors have switched their weighting between two factors. So top line growth, like for like sales growth, and margins. When I started at Saatchi's and most of the time at WPP, that was 50-50. It's now that top line growth is more highly valued than margins, EBITDA margins, pre-tax margins, whatever it is. So what we're doing with S4 is pandering to that. I mean, S4 is a royalty on digital transformation. So Warren Buffett in the 1970s and 80s bought IPG and Ogilvy in the stock market because he said it was a royalty on the growth
Yeah.
of globalization. What we're doing is simply a royalty. We're not a tech company. People don't understand that. We're not ad tech or martech. We're a service business. Neither do we wish to be ad tech or martech. So coming back to the question, that was the situation, growth. And then we have 4 pillars in our constitution, or 4 amendments in our constitution. One was digital only. That's 50% of the media market, which was 500 to 550 billion last year. And digital was half of that, dominated by Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and in the East by Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok. And so digital first, and digital will be 70% of the market by 2024, according to most analysts in the US. So that's one thing. The second thing was the Holy Trinity model, which I explained. The third was faster, better, cheaper. Faster is about agility. Better is about understanding the digital ecosystem. So it's the 6 platforms I've already mentioned, plus Apple, plus Microsoft, Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, IBM and SAP, Twitter, Snap, Pinterest, LG, Samsung, Spotify, Netflix, Xiaomi, Epic. I'd throw in Epic as well. We're building a studio in New Delhi based on the Unreal Engine. We think that's a technology which is super good for developing content globally, because you can do it from one point. Xiaomi, JD.com, those are the companies. So that's better, understanding those. And as demand shifts or supply shifts within that ecosystem, we shift with it in terms of advising our clients. And then the final thing is cheaper, or value, which is really about, in this world, at the moment, GDP growth. I mean, I'm very bullish on 21 and 22 because global GDP growth, as a result of the rebound from the pandemic and the huge fiscal stimulus. I mean, people forget, 1.85 trillion from Biden, a corona package, if you like, coronavirus package. Then you have an infrastructure bill, and then you've got something, 2 trillion, and you've got another 3 probably coming down the pike. This is huge, in an economy which is 24 trillion. If it's 5 or 6 trillion, that's massive. And I think people are underestimating, whilst we were talking about what life was like in Athens and Greece, and it's still very challenging. There are still third waves and vaccination issues and everything, and there will continue to be so. The general drift is, the US is, as one analyst said to me yesterday, on fire, and we see that in our numbers for Q1. And I think the UK will be strong because of the efficiency of the vaccination program. Western continental Europe will take more time because the vaccination programs have not been as good as, say, in France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, but they'll get there. And we've always, really interestingly, since April of last year, when the pandemic really hit, we've always said that Q2 of this year would be the first quarter. So 21, 22, very strong. But then in 23, the prognostication is that GDP growth goes back to 2 or 3%. And so efficiency will continue to be really important. And then the last pillar is a unitary structure. None of this holding company, the model that we built at WPP goes back to about 1950 in Marion Harbour and IPG. What we're doing is building one firm, which is not easy to do because you have strong people, they want to run their own businesses, but we're very much, and we think a unitary model, seamless is a much overworked word. We don't just turn up at pitches with the same T-shirt. We implement, right? And we implement as one. So that's the background. Long explanation, but I wanted to go where the growth was, and digital's where the growth was. That was, is, and will be.
Yeah, no, I'm a true believer in that. So you talked about like building like one unitary company. How do you make sure that the different parts, as you said, don't fight each other, that they have the same interests and that they continue being aligned towards providing?
Well, we're going to one brand. So really, effectively, at the moment, what we have S4 is sort of like the stock market brand, if you like. We have two two practices: content, which is about 70%, which has been built around Media Monks, which was the first deal that we did in less than 3 years ago. We did it in July of 2018. And we've built, I think it's now, 11 companies that we've added to Media Monks and built them around Media Monks and the content practice. Then in December of 2018, we brought in Mighty Hive, which is the data and analytics and digital media company. And we've done, I think, 9 things around that and built them in. So what we have now is 70% of our business in content and 30% in data and digital media. I'd like that to be 60-40. I think we're a little bit over indexed at the moment, if you like, on content. So I'd like more there. And given your first question, about Apple and Google, I think that's important in data analytics. We have a very good data and analytics network, which we built. But the answer is we've coalesced it. And this year, we have 3 objectives, to bed down the whoppers that we won. These are clients of over $20 million a year, BMW Mini and Mondelez are 2. Google, a telecoms company that is well known to you, we've discussed, is another, but we have an NDA, and Facebook is the 5th. We have to bed down those 2 wins from last year, big wins from last year, but grow organically. And the 3rd objective is to continue to merge, as we call it. That's a very important distinction. We don't buy companies, we merge with them. And it's critically important that the management of the merger partner, so all of those 20 deals plus the 2 that we did with Media Monks and Mighty Hive, the owners should be the management, or as much as possible. Yeah. And they should be willing, it's okay to cash in half, but the other half has to be them rolling their stock into S4. So our market cap today is about $4 billion, and about 40% of that is in the hands of the management. I have a control share, so we have no fear of making the wrong decision in the context of the long-term future of the company. We will do things in the short term that build long-term value, in our opinion, and we won't be, our feet are not held to the fire by quarterly performance reporting. But the heart of your question is not. So we'll go to a common brand this year. That was objective 2 of the 3, which we're actually using it internally already. So anybody who really looks hard at what we're doing will figure out how it's going to be positioned. But we wanted to bed that down with our people and our clients. We didn't want to do what WPP did with Gray and AKQA, which was to announce something from the center and then have a riot or revolution from clients and from people. So we wanted to bed it down. And so Unitary, and the final thing is, we have very, very good people. They are very strong personalities. They have built very good businesses. So good people tend to be difficult to integrate or bring together as a team. But, and that's a dangerous thing to say, because average people say, in order to be good, I have to be difficult, which doesn't fulfill any purpose. But we've managed to do it. And, we managed to find to date people. We had a situation just recently where we really didn't feel a very, very good company, like the management, like the area that they're in, very sexy. But we didn't feel, we weren't willing to go the last mile. We didn't feel that they had the long term, because our mission, which I sort of said before, is to create the new age, new era advertising and services model and disrupt the old. So there is a missionary zealot type approach here.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely an interesting take. So bringing back the conversation again to consumer data. So we've seen Apple go strong for protecting the consumer, and we've seen Facebook complain a bit, if you want, about Apple's decision, saying that it's going to hurt small and medium-sized businesses. Like, who do you think is right in this fight? Like, is Apple fair to say that we have to protect the consumer and their data and their privacy, or is Facebook the one taking?
Well, you put me in a difficult position, because both are big clients of ours, so I have to be careful what I say. No, I think I could sort of wiggle out of the question by saying both are right. No, it is a tension, and you get tension. If you think about those 20 or so companies that I mentioned, and let's narrow in on the 6 platforms, 3 Western, 3 Eastern,
Sure.
and you've seen what the Chinese government, I mean, the Beijing has clearly said that Jack Ma is too powerful.
Yeah.
And that applies to Tencent. So that they fine them what $2.7 billion, whatever it is, for anti-competitive measures. So I think the answer is you're always going to get those tensions, between Oracle, Adobe, Salesforce, SAP. Google switched from Oracle to Salesforce. I think to SAP. I think it was last week or so. Big switch on the and SAP's first quarter numbers today were extremely strong. So they are both right in the sense that there's this competitive tussle all the time. Hardware companies. I mean, that list that I gave you: hardware, software, and platforms. So you're always going to get those tensions. I think Facebook comes in for a lot of criticism, less so probably Google. They're with Amazon, they're hauled before Congress every month. I think the testimony to Congress, the most difficult thing was around Amazon and Facebook's approach on deals. Yeah. Whether they put too much pressure on the company they were acquiring. I think that will result in regulatory control of deals. I don't think they'll get broken up. Google now is heading on to 2 trillion.
Yeah.
Apple, of course, has gone through that, and an analyst wrote yesterday it was going to be a $3 trillion company. So you are talking about very big companies which are effectively nation states, so they have to exercise responsibility. But you're always going to get these tussles.
Sure.
The honest answer is the market is expanding at such a rate. This year will expand by 20%. We're budgeting 25% growth. We actually internally are budgeting more than that. So this is like-for-like growth. This is not doing deals. Like-for-like growth. So I think the reason why it works is, all these companies are looking at the sky. They're not looking at the boots. I like to put it like that way. Many companies in many sectors which are only growing at GDP rates of 2, 3, or 4% in the long term, look at their boots, meaning procurement, costs, finance become more important than revenue generation. And the key is revenue generation. Yeah. So I think they both have arguments. The privacy issue, what drove the Google, I should have said this, what drove the Google decision was, I think, worries about regulation and concerns about privacy, and they decided to get on the front foot, and I think it was the right thing to do, to take the initiative on privacy. Because if you look at the second blog, there's that Pew statistic in the beginning of it, which talks about 76% or whatever it is, 73% of consumers are worried about privacy. So I think it's almost like a natural phenomenon in the market, but the market is growing so fast and changing so violently that it's really important.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's similar with what the automotive industry did back in the day with the introduction of the automobile and seat belts. It was something that they built into the cars and made it mandatory long before regulation came. And I think at the end of the day, you do have to look for the good of your end user, your consumer, keeping them, whether that's safe on the road or safe online, if you will.
Yeah, and there's one other point. I mean, Google, when you get to $1 trillion, and if you think that your GDP is the equivalent to market cap, countries like Germany, Japan, I think is 5 or 6 trillion. Germany is about 3.5 trillion. The UK probably 2.5, 3, and Italy and Spain maybe around 2. I mean, you're talking about very big nation states, and they have to exercise responsibility, and they are doing that. I mean, maybe because of the pressure that was brought to bear from all sorts of angles, but de facto they are doing that. The other thing to remember, you touched on it, is that something like 60 to 70% of their revenue base is coming from small and medium-sized businesses. And you have to be careful what you do. I mean, in the pandemic, how did a small or medium-sized business survive? Well, clear in the UK, you got furlough payments. But if you wanted to sell anything, how did you sell it? You didn't have any distribution. There was no physical distribution, so you used online distribution. And I think that's resulted in a huge acceleration of trends that were there around the consumer, education, financial services, ordering groceries and essentials in-home games and entertainment. Around the media, it's accelerated all the trend, the streamers growing, Disney going to 240 million subscriptions by 2024, rivaling Netflix own expansion, the rise of the TV companies through their streaming apps at the end of the day. All that has been accelerated. And then finally, at the enterprise level, the shock to the system in Q2 of 2020, when the pandemic blew a hole through their P&Ls, it's made them think, they don't have to maintain the status quo anymore because the status quo has been totally disrupted. And so they're just getting on with life faster, and change agents inside the companies are being given more oxygen. We've seen that with BMW, we've seen that with Mondelez. They want to change, and they want to change quickly. And ironically, although the pandemic was an appalling situation, 3 million people dying according to the official statistics, and probably more than that in reality. You'll see what's going on in India and Brazil now. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible situation. But the fact is, it's accelerated decision making, it's accelerated change as a result.
Definitely. Okay, taking the conversation on a different level, let's get a bit more tactical. So how would you invest the company's budget, and how would you split it between brand marketing versus performance-based advertising? Is there really a difference between the two nowadays? Like you talked about a new way of running an ad, running a campaign, like a more ongoing model. Would you care to expand a bit on that?
Well, I think the traditional agencies, the ad holding companies, who are not our competitors, Accenture is our competitor. So we probably match Globant. Globant comes into digital transformation through the IT side. We come in through sales and marketing. We probably meet in the middle of client companies. But the traditional agencies remain long-term focused, brand building, putting emphasis on that. Some of my colleagues in the industry made the ludicrous. It was ludicrous in April of last year, and said, spend. That clients should continue to spend. Complete nonsense. That the pandemic recession stopped everything. I mean, sort of dropped dead. I mean, we literally 2 weeks. April, I remember back end of March and April. We were running our scenarios. I mean, in the event, we exceeded even our most optimistic scenario, but it was a very challenging time. And I mentioned animation and robotics, and moved from live events to online events. These revenue streams, went vertical, if you like, as a result of the pandemics. The traditional agencies, are too heavy. They think too much about strategy. They think too much about planning. And the world certainly has become more short term. That may be a problem, but it's become more short term. So there is much more short term focus. And so the answer to you, I would call it activation or, implementation. That becomes more important. And the best example of that is you can't spend 3 to 6 months producing a TV commercial when the market is moving at light speed. And I'll give you a very good example. Facebook told us that women on average, this is about a year ago, spend 1.7 seconds on a blog. So we created, Media Monks, our content practice, created in Italy a campaign for eyebrow makeup with 2-second ads, not 15-second TV ads, but 2-second ads. So I think the answer to your question is, I refer to the continuous loop around data and content and digital media. I think that is the key. So when we talk about faster, better, cheaper, which some people sneer at, there's a more elegant way of putting it, call it speed, quality, value. That's a little bit more elegant. Those are the keys. Those three things are the keys, and agility is super important. So naturally, you have to be, that's why in-housing or our embedded model, where we put our people into the client, is sort of more important in a way, and I think long term, than just outside sourcing the agency. Clients have to take back control of what they started to outsource. It goes back to 2008, because GDP growth was only 2 or 3 or 4% after the great financial crisis, say from 2010 on. Well, 2010 was a rebound year, but 11 on, you grow at 2, 3 or 4% organically. You have to cut your costs because you have no, or be more efficient because you have no pricing power. There's very little inflation, at least until, maybe it'll get stronger now and give our clients a bit more pricing wiggle room. And you bought back your stock if you're a listed company, and that generated sort of 5 to 10% EPS growth. That was the steady state model. That's been blown apart by the pandemic. So, and it's a very different model now in relation to the digital world. So it's all change. And I think if performance marketing is about, your definition of that is about speed of response, short-term focus to a world where the consumer, look, 30% of US households went online for groceries and essentials within about 2 months in the US. And it mirrors what we saw in China on the SARS. Alan Jope of Unilever always said, when he ran Unilever in China, he now runs the whole kit and caboodle, and he said SARS changed the pattern of Chinese consumers' behavior. And it continued afterwards.
Yeah, that was actually something I wanted to ask. Like, how do you see people's buying decisions change or evolve because of the lockdowns? Like, what do you think that they're going to be spending on after the lockdowns are over? And what are your clients betting on at this point?
Well, there's a huge. People are underestimating how the Q2 surge. Remember, I said that. We even last year, even at this time last year, I write a weekly email, and we were talking in that. I'm on my 54th, I think it is, or 55th. So we've been doing it for about 55 weeks, and we've always taken the view that Q2 of 2020 was the key turning point. It also happens to be the easiest comparators. We grew every month of last year organically, but April was our lowest at +3, March was +7, and then we accelerated into May 5 and 12, I think it was, and then we were 23% in Q3 and 27% in Q4, and you'll see what we do in Q1. So, we're very sort of bullish, if you like, and I said to you before, we're bullish on 21 and 22 as a whole. The other thing that's happened is that these huge inflows of money, fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus into the economy have been saved. So if you look at consumer saving on both sides of the Atlantic, it's increased dramatically. So obviously, consumers are worried. There's insecurity over jobs as a result of the pandemic. The furlough payments, for example, here in the UK have buttressed that. But what happens when the furlough payments go? By the way, that's another Google, Facebook, Amazon positive point, right? After the pandemic, if you withdraw the furloughs, which companies are going to be the ones that are most affected by the withdrawal of the subsidies? And the answer is small and medium-sized business. What is the engine of the economy? Jack Ma used to say this about Alibaba. It's the platform for the Chinese entrepreneur. So if 60%, let's say, of Google and Facebook and Amazon's ad revenues, which are 180 billion last year, 80 and 20 billion. If 60% of that comes from small businesses, you muck about with that at your peril if you're running a country, because they are an engine of growth and protection for small and medium-sized businesses. So the surge is huge amongst consumers, and I think clients, I call them a coiled spring, and consumers a coiled spring, because I think what happened last year, we grew at 20% last year, but the holding companies went back on average by like 5 to 10%.
Yeah.
So we went forward and they went backward. We doubled our headcount from 2,500 to almost 5,000. And deals took about half of that increment, but we onboarded about 1,200, 1,300 people almost online, in the last year. But there's this huge surge coming, and clients probably sort of in Q3 and Q4 of last year and Q2 sort of trimmed back a bit. They moved money to digital, they moved away from traditional, and will continue to do so. But I think, as I say, consumers and clients are coiled springs, and you could never underestimate how important that. We saw the LVMH figures this morning for Q1. That's obviously influenced by China and Tiffany, which they've just brought in. But it gives you an idea that even in the teeth of this pandemic recession, well-run businesses, and that's a brilliantly run business, can succeed. So I'm very, very positive. 21, 22. The issue for me is what happens in 23 when we have to figure out how we pay for all this. I'm not saying that what we injected, that Biden's binge, is not the right thing to do, but at some point in time we have to pay for it. So corporation tax is going to go up. Income tax is going to go up, capital gains tax is going to go up. The rich, quite rightly, the 1% are going to have to subsidize, quite rightly, what's happened. The inequality gap has been growing since 1985, since Reagan and Thatcher. And I think it's going to reverse.
That would be quite interesting to witness, actually. So in terms of like small and medium-sized businesses, and we touched upon this briefly, do you think like Amazon, or is it going to be Shopify that's going to win in the end, like the model of being the aggregator and bringing everybody on board and getting the consumer to come to you, or the model of the platform where the business has a closer relationship to the end buyer?
Well, I think, when the web started, if you went back in history, advertising was the way. And when James Walter Thompson, or NWA, whoever it was, I think it was James Walter Thompson, devised advertising, it went over the heads of the retailers, direct to the consumers. That's why manufacturers liked it. I mean, the commission was paid, by the client, and obviously to the media, to the agency, and the payments were made to the media. But essentially, it was to reach over the heads of retailers and wholesalers to establish a direct communication. What then transpired was, Walmart, Tesco, Carrefour became more and more important and controlled that relationship. A.G. Lafley used to be the CEO of P&G, talked about the last mile and the importance of it, and how do you get to the consumer and engage with the consumer. And when the web came along, everybody shouted, all the clients shouted, hallelujah, we're going to have a direct way of getting to the consumer. But what's happened is the growth of what you said, of whether you call them aggregators or e-tailers or whatever. But the control of the relationship is a really important one. So when I mentioned Mark Pritchard and property, you just think about that for a minute. But you have your consumer profiles, you know who they are. I was talking to the head of an airline, global airline, and we talked about this issue and data. And he said, he has parts of his operation that don't talk to one another. So it's very easy to talk about first-party data, but it's very difficult to do. And there are huge costs in getting, because you have to write off legacy systems, not cash costs, but book costs. And people have been hesitant to do that because, people running companies on average listed companies last for 5 years, CEO lasts for 5 years. And they like to, you remember that steady state model, 2, 3, 4% growth, cut your costs, buy back your stock, it delivers 5 to 10% EPS growth. That's the perfect legacy, if you like, after 5 years. So it's all changed. I don't know who will win. You said Amazon, Spotify. Well, between Amazon and Spotify, Amazon is a huge machine. So if Amazon is currently running at 20 billion on advertising, it'll get to 100 billion.
Yeah.
And so I think Google, Facebook, Amazon, those three platforms will continue to dominate. I said to you about regulation. I don't think they get broken up. By the way, if you did break them up, from our point of view, that 20 company list I gave you would go to say 26. So it gives us a more complex ecosystem, and our clients are more complex ones. So it's pretty good. But Scott Galloway, who's so virulently anti-Facebook, or the leadership of Facebook. He's not anti-Facebook really. He doesn't like the leadership, which I think is wrong on. But if you broke them up, Instagram, or you broke Amazon, AWS, or whatever, Google, you broke it up in one way or another. The individual elements would probably become as big. I mean, Scott Galloway said AWS will, I think, outbid or out to enlarge Amazon itself. So I think that the specific battle that you mentioned, I mean, it's chalk and cheese, it's oranges and apples, but I think Amazon is hugely important.
That we see that with them being one of the largest advertisers, right? Like, even though they stand as an e-tailer. They
are. I think you said one of. I think in recent data reports, they're the largest. Used to be Procter, and it's now Amazon.
Yeah, that's completely valid. So, like on a different note, do you think that globalization and we briefly touched upon this, like the being able to leverage cheap labor from different parts of the world, played a role in the rise of nationalist movements, like the likes of Donald J. Trump, even like the Brexit movement, and like is the global economy and commerce going to subtract or continue expanding? Like, is it a good time to be running a global business?
It's a more difficult time to be running a global business. For example, the tensions between US and China. I mean, John Kerry is going to China. I think it's today. I think it's the first member of the administration here to talk about climate change, and he wants to isolate that from the economic tensions or political tensions. The US-China rift, I mean, to get into perspective, China will be the largest economy in 2028. Currently, it's about, America's about 24 trillion, China must be about 14 roughly. But that's not on a per capita basis. It's really important to remember that you have 300 million Americans, you've got 1.3 billion Chinese, but on an absolute basis. So the plates are shifting. We're 70 Americas, 20 Western Europe, and 10 Asia, and we want to be 40, 20, 40. That says China and India rule, if you want to put it that way. So those tensions have caused tremendous issues for our clients, because ultimately you're going to have to choose. The Chinese are saying to Chinese companies, you can't list in New York. The Americans are saying, we're going to introduce tariffs or block the development, TikTok and everything else. So it's a very difficult environment. Now it goes back to what I said before. Ray Dalio, the Bridgewater, probably one of the most successful hedge fund people, if not the most, and who writes really good stuff and has some great charts. He tracked the rise of inequality back to the mid-'80s, Reagan and Thatcher in particular, the people he highlighted. And if you plot, the sort of proportion of the economy that's capital and labor, capital's gone up like that and labor's gone like that. Globalization, we didn't manage it well, or as well as we should have done. It brought huge benefits because of free trade.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, we owe it a lot. The problem with it is, just like digital disruption, it destroys certain industries in certain countries. To your point, high labor cost goes to low, the arbitrage. and you have to have radical shifts. So in the US and the UK, for example, the government, together with private industry, didn't move fast enough, with education, re-education, reskilling, movement of labor, all that sort of stuff. Didn't move fast enough. Easy to say after the event, but they didn't move fast enough to do it. So I think it's right. Now that means that we're probably going to operate in a more fragmented world. The irony about the pandemic is that I think some companies are better run today as a result of the pandemic than they were before, because top management has devolved more responsibility down the line.
Yeah.
There's a sort of eerie analogy to offices and office occupation. People like at my age, the old farts like me, think that you have to be in the office, you have to see the people, you have to interact with people, and the productivity suffers. We have not seen that. I mean, there are big issues around culture and onboarding people and the like. And I'm not saying that you go to a zero office model.
Yeah.
You probably go to what everybody calls hybrid, and 60% of the time in the office, 3 days, and a couple of days outside. Depends on whether it'll be 5 days if people haven't got the resources at home, live with their parents, or have young kids or whatever.
That's an issue, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and there'll be more distance living because of cost, because San Francisco, for example, became too expensive. There'll be more dispersed working because, if you're a software engineer and you're coding, you can do that at home. So I think there is, variation, but generally there will be more fragmentation. And, we have China-India tensions. We have China-Hong Kong tensions. We have China-Taiwan tensions. We have China-Australian tensions. We have China-Philippines tensions. And the Biden administration is not going to change that. What happened under Obama and under Trump is that they basically, and American business supported it because of the tariffs, and because of the stealing of intellectual property. But the horse is out of the stable now. It's a bit like we used to complain about Japan. We said Japan copied, and the Hong Kong copied in the textile area and everything. Well, it's changing, and I think these tensions are so G2 world, China and the US, they dominate. Think about that. So the world is about 75 trillion, I think it is, and the US is about a third of that. And China, as I said, is about 40. So put the two together, that's 38. I mean, it's almost half of the world economy, if not half. So I think those tensions are going to be huge. And then when you think about cyber and you think about the pandemic and the disruption to the supply chain, there are two things happening which encourage fragmentation. On cyber, before the cyber attacks, and we had one at WPP, we were always told by IBM and other, integrate everything, integrate the whole network. As a result of the cyber attack in Ukraine, we tried to identify the markets that were high risk and then break them apart. So you had sort of disembodied systems. And now with supply chains, people are going to look for alternatives because of the tensions, for example, in China, or make America great again, or, and Biden is putting huge amounts of money into infrastructure spending and to democratic programs. I mean, it's not just infrastructure program. So I think the odds are that we will deal with in a more fragmented world. We are seeing, we have a transparent model in China. We have a transparent model in India. When I was at the WPP, we built a business in China, which was 20% of the market. And in India, it was 50%. And we had some big blocks around Ogilvy Thompson that gave us, because they've been in India for years. But in China, we sort of developed on the back of after Deng Xiaoping's famous speech in 1985. We founded WPP in 1985. So we built a 50 share there, 20 share there, and a 50 in India. I don't think that will be easy to do again. But the positive thing from our point of view is that the foreigners, the gaijins, as the Japanese would call it, the foreigners are probably at a disadvantage. There is a clear Chinese swing amongst millennials. and at the governmental level to, made in China, be self-sufficient and shift, into Asia and look at Asia and create alternative systems, even technology systems. So we're going to have two systems. We're already going to have Western-based systems and Chinese-based systems, and because of the argument about Huawei and the arguments about Huawei and whatever. So I think it is going to be a more fragmented world. It will be more difficult to navigate. The growth rates, I think, will continue to be strong. When I say that, the post-pandemic growth rate, I think, will be around 2, 3, or 4%, which may be a little bit better than we've seen before. If we get some inflation, the US inflation statistics yesterday or on Friday, I think we're just over 2%. So that's at the level that the Fed said they want to sort of intervene on interest rates. But having said that, they've said their priority is reducing unemployment. So they're not going to do that until, that's why I come back to 23.
Yeah.
So the final message is, yes, more fragmentation makes it more difficult. More agility is needed as a result of it, more variability. But 21 and 22, hold on, fasten your seatbelt.
Yeah, we've been hearing that a lot. So we have time for one last question, if you're right. Okay. So, and I want to change gears a bit. So, do you think at the end of the day, and build, like being a guy who's built and run advertising companies, do you think advertising is a good or bad thing? Like, are we in the business of generating, if you want, fake needs and pushing people towards whatever choice is better for the brand at the end of the day? Or, does that actually justify saying there's a special place in hell for?
Well, I remember when I first went into advertising, I was working at Saatchi's. Actually, when I was consulting for them, my father had a lawyer, and it was a legal practice in London, and the senior partner was not my dad's. My dad knew his father, but so he was like me. He was equivalent to me, a second generation, if you like. And he said to me, when I said I was working with Saatchi's, and I became CFO in whenever it was in 76, 7, something like that, 8, maybe, that I became CFO. He said to me, "Oh, you're going into advertising. They stimulate, needs. They stimulate demand for things that people don't need." Yeah. And that's not true. You might be able to do it once. It's like a political candidate. You have a bad political candidate, you might get away with it once. You don't get away with it twice. The consumer, David Ogilvy is a bit of a sort of sexist remark in today's context. He said, the consumer is not a moron, it's your wife. So the consumer is not a moron, it's your partner. And that can be male, female, or whatever. So I think that that's a misunderstanding. It is true, you can con people once, if I can put it that way, but they're intelligent and they understand. And so I think advertising, you mentioned Spotify, that has an advertising free if you're willing to listen to advertising, a premium if you're not. And I think Netflix should go that way. I mean, if I was I know this is anathema to Reed Hastings, but I think given the competition from Disney Plus, if they had a model where subsidized model on advertising, so instead of paying whatever, you paid 25% less or a third less or half less or whatever it is, I think that would be extremely attractive to people. And I think as long as the comes back to creativity, if the advertising is both creative and effective, which is not easy to do. Yeah. We think we do it. We think we do it very well. Then it will score. So I don't have any moral, qualms about what we do. I mean, on that area, just one point, what we do is determined by our people. I mean, now that is it's not top down. the people inside, our 5,000 people or whatever it is, determine what we do. If they don't like what a client stands for or where a client is, they won't work for them. So, there are some inconsistencies, I would think, without going into detail about those sort of decisions. But no, I think what we're doing, to get consistent growth, you have to understand consumers. It goes back to where we started the conversation quite neatly. First-party data is crucial.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. It's
pleasure. Enjoyed it. Good luck with AdWorld. I hope. And if anybody wants to talk to me, Martin at s4capital.com.
Perfect.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.